What's up everyone, it is Nima here, and I'm going to explain to you why Link is dead. Yes, the Link that we know, the one that started the whole series of The Legend of Zelda, is actually dead. I want to be clear, this is not a comprehensive deep dive into the storyline. That could take hours, honestly. Really, what I wanted to do here is to kind of figure out which pathway works best to lead us to Tears of the Kingdom. Now, we all kind of know where the game starts, and we know the somewhat order of them. So I wanted to play all of them and figure out which one just makes more sense, and which one actually tends to lead more to Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. So I'm going to go over each game and just discuss them minimally. First, I'm going to start off with the very first game in the series, which is Skyward Sword. And in that game, we actually learn about the 4 elements that make up every Legend of Zelda game, really. We have Link, Zelda, the Triforce, and a bad guy. In this game, though, we do find out about how the Triforce was made by 3 different goddesses, and how if one was worthy, they could use the Triforce, but if they couldn't, it would just break off and 2 of the other pieces would go away, with the one that best represents them being the one that they kept. And before the game really even starts, we learned about Hylia, a goddess who, due to the extreme conditions, took all of her people, put them on a piece of land, and actually raised the land up into the sky, where they would be secluded from the evil below. Hylia actually stays behind and defeats Demise, then tries to use the Triforce to seal away this ultimate evil. But since she's a goddess, she can't really use the Triforce. So she then demotes herself to human, sort of, and she is reborn as Zelda. Now we enter the fray as Link, and we get to see Link and Zelda actually closer than I think I've seen him in a lot of games. But that doesn't last long because in comes Lord Gilliam, who under the control of Demise is tracking down Hylia, who is now in the form of Zelda. He finally finds her, waits for the perfect opportunity to create this giant tornado while they're flying on their birds, or loft wings, and ends up throwing Zelda all the way to the surface below. And this is when Link then finds the Master Sword and learns that the Master Sword is actually a form of navigation for him, as Fi is actually the spirit that lives within the Master Sword. And while this sounds confusing, well, this is basically setting up the entire story of The Legend of Zelda, as they throw a lot at you at once, and this is basically them covering up for the last few years, well, decade at that point, of not having much of a story. Long story short, Link is able to save Zelda, or help Zelda, as Link beats Demise, and they use the Triforce in which to bring the Sky Island down to the surface and actually seal Demise underneath what was the Sky Island. And that takes us to Minish Cap, where we catch up with the gang at Hyrule as they're getting ready to celebrate a Pickery. Now, this Pickery ended up defeating the ultimate evil and sealing it into a chest. Now, legend says that this Pickery would return every 100 years. Well, wouldn't you know, it has been 100 years. So we catch up with them as they're about to do this gigantic festival. And this whole festival culminates in a sword fighting tournament, where the winner of this year's tournament is an evil little dude named Barty. He actually wins and releases the chest that containing all of the evil, spreading it around. Also breaking the Pickery sword and turning Zelda into stone. It turns out that the only way to save Zelda is to actually fix the Pickery sword, and so that has Link searching around for the Pickery, who are actually calling themselves the Minish. While on his journey, he bumps into a little bird hat thingy called Eslo, who becomes his hat. Is also a weird little talking bird looking creature, and actually allows Link to Minish himself, literally turning himself into a Minish, where he can interact with the people and continue on his quest. The most important thing to take away from this game, really, is that we end up fixing the sword and giving it its true power, which allows it to turn into the 4 sword. Now, we use that power to then defeat the big bad and save Zelda. That takes us to the next game, 4 sword, which actually doesn't really push the game or the story too much further, except for sort of more lore into the Master Sword, I guess, sort of, not really. But there really isn't much to say on this one. So, on to Ocarina of Time. Now, this is where the timelines actually split, and we have 3 different options. On Ocarina of Time, we play as the boy without a fairy who ends up getting a fairy, takes advice from a tree and learns that we're destined for greatness. It's the Deku tree. Talks in this one and tells us where to go. We find ourselves at Hyrule Castle, where we meet Zelda, and we discover there's some bad stuff about to go down. For the first time, we are introduced to Ganondorf, who has actually earned the king's favor, but in reality, his only goal is to actually retrieve the 3 pieces of the Triforce that has been spread amongst the 3 tribes. Zelda sees all this in a dream and tries to convince her father to banish Ganondorf, but he doesn't listen, of course, so she entrusts us to collect these 3 pieces. Well, luckily we already have one, so we're on the right path. Now, we end up meeting the other 2 tribes, the Zoras and the Gorons, and they give us these keys as well. Well, we take all of this back to Zelda, where we find Zelda actually escaping with her personal guard Impa. Now, they're escaping Ganondorf, who is attacking Hyrule in the search of an instrument. The instrument, the Ocarina of Time, which Zelda promptly throws at us. Now, with Ocarina in hand, we decide to go along with the original plan. We take all the 3 keys and end up opening the Sacred Realm. Well, it turns out Ganondorf also has access to the Sacred Realm, where he gets a hold of the Triforce and essentially is able to keep 1 piece, but the other 2 go flying, while also turning Hyrule into a literal nightmare. But Link needs the Master Sword, and Link is still a kid, so he can't actually hold the Master Sword. He ends up spending 7 long years basically asleep in the Sacred Realm, where he then emerges as an adult, and he can now wield the Master Sword. In this time, Zelda has to go into hiding, basically disguising herself as Sheik, a badass ninja. Well, she tells us that we need to break the curse on 5 other temples. When we do that, we're able to save the sages, where they can help us seal Gandalf away in the Sacred Realm. Now, this all leads to a big battle with Ganondorf, where he ends up uniting all of the pieces of the Triforce and uses them to create Ganon, where we beat him and essentially trap him in the Sacred Realm with the help of the sages. Phew, now we are able to actually start our video, or our mission, trying to figure out which is the best timeline, because after the Ocarina of Time, there is actually 3 timelines that could occur. One where Link actually dies and loses the battle to Ganondorf. Now, this timeline actually has us playing A Link to the Past, the original Legend of Zelda, Zelda 2, A Link Between Worlds, as well as a couple of the Game Boy games. Now, the second option actually has Link return to a child after the events of the Ocarina of Time. This leads us to Mask of Majora and Twilight Princess. And then the third option is where Link actually just vanishes after Ocarina of Time. And essentially, over the years, Hyrule is flooded to protect the Triforce, and that of course leads to Wind Waker, Phantom Hourglass, and then later, a revamped Hyrule in the form of Spirit Tracks. So I first went with the Dark Timeline, because that one just felt right. It felt better to go back to A Link to the Past. And so starting off with that game, we essentially find it's been a couple generations, Gandalf has been trapped inside the Sacred Realm, and it's basically just become pure evil there. Well, the sages have kept it sealed away, so not a problem, until an evil wizard shows up, kills the king, and starts taking descendants of the sages so that he may release Ganondorf from the Sacred Realm, releasing the seal in general. Well, this one specific descendant of the sages, Zelda, ends up telepathically communicating to Link and his uncle, where Link goes, saves her, gets her to safety, and then begins looking for the pendants so that he could unlock the Master Sword. Well, after that, we're then able to travel back and forth between the Sacred Realm and the regular realm. We defeat the wizard, and then fight the true boss, Ganon, who is this weird pig creature thing, defeat Ganondorf, and then obtain the Triforce, where we wish for peace and everything to return how it was. And for a while it does. In fact, everyone that was even killed during this whole experience is actually brought back to life, and everything seems good for a while. Next up is Link's Awakening, which, to be honest, is kind of pointless, because it turns out that essentially the whole thing is a dream, basic, and doesn't really matter and doesn't factor into the game, or into the timeline, which is kind of messed up because it's a really good game that is kind of all for nothing. Now, the next ones on our path are the Oracle games. Now, I'm going to be honest, I don't have those games and haven't played them, so I don't know exactly what happens, but I've read into them, and essentially it has the twin wizards from the end of Ocarina of Time showing up again, causing a lot of problems, but essentially we save the day and turn everything back to the way it was. Continuing with the same length from A Link to the Past, we are now moving on to A Link Between Worlds, one of my favorite games of all time. Now, this game essentially retells the story of A Link to the Past, but also creates like a doppelganger game, where we find out about Lorule, another dimension or area that doesn't seem to make sense, but anyway, we find out that Yuga, a evil sorcerer, is taking all the sage's descendants and turning them into paintings. Well, he tries to do the same with Link, but thanks to a newfound friend called Rivio, Link has a bracelet that allows him to go between 3D and 2D. So when turned into a painting, he can just kind of walk around and actually use this to manipulate things for the betterment. This is one of my favorite puzzle mechanics, by the way. But as time goes on, we actually do descend into Lorule, where we meet Princess Hilda, who is essentially a doppelganger of Princess Zelda, and she tells us about the Triforce that they had in their world that was destroyed because the people just continued to fight over it. Now, Princess Hilda says that she can help us find the piece of the Triforce for courage, and when she actually has it, she turns on us and decides that she's going to use it to try to reform the Triforce of Lorule. Well, thanks to, again, the help of Rivio, we're able to defeat Princess Hilda and Sorcerer Yugo. Now, with our Triforce in hand, we unite all the pieces and wish for peace in Lorule as well as Hyrule, saving two universes at the same time. Triforce Heroes is next, and literally has nothing to do with Timeline or anything else, so we're just going to skip it and go into the original Legend of Zelda. And in this one, there's a little bit of a backstory. Essentially, every kingdom and generation of kingdoms has had the Triforce, and they've used it to restore peace and prosperity to the people. Well, one king along that timeline decided not to. He decided to split the Triforce up into three pieces. He kept the piece of power, he hid the piece of courage, and gave the piece of wisdom to his daughter Zelda. Well, his son, actually wanted the power for himself. He put his sister into some deep slumber under the guidance of a wizard. There's a ton of evil wizards everywhere in this world, and essentially the entire world collapsed and turned into complete chaos. That is why in The Legend of Zelda, the first one, the world looks so dilapidated, because it is longer in the timeline, but something definitely happened, and apparently that's what happened. By the way, most of that information was obtained from playing Adventures of Link of Zelda 2. So back to the original game, we need to find the pieces of the Triforce. There are 8 of them. We bring them all together. We fight and defeat Ganon, unite the Triforce, save the kingdom. Everything is rah rah rah, happy happy. Except for the fact that it really isn't, and the world is still dilapidated, and there's still a bunch of Ganon's people running around. So in Adventures of Link or Zelda 2, we decided to stay behind and actually help clean up this mess and to kill off all the remaining bad guys that are running around. Well, the bad guys, they have an idea themselves, as they want to resurrect Ganon by pouring the blood of Link on his charred corpse, which is weird. But at the age of 16 in this game, we develop a Triforce symbol on our hand, which, by the way, just think about that. He was 16 when this happened, so that means The Legend of Zelda, the first one, he's like 10, which is crazy that a 10-year-old saved, like literally a 10-year-old saved the world by essentially defeating a foe in Mortal Kombat. Anyway, Link decides to show this now seal on his hand to Impa, who tells him the story of the first Princess of Zelda and the tragic situation that Princess Zelda has been kept in slumber all this time, and she encourages him to go find the Triforce of Courage to reunite the Triforce once again. Well, you go on this epic adventure, and you fight bad guys, and you end up like fighting a version of yourself. And yes, the endgame boss is incredibly difficult, and once you're done, you reunite the Triforce and use your wish to awaken Princess Zelda the First. And that's it for that timeline. Now, it does sort of fit, to be honest. Like, you could kind of see where Breath of the Wild would come after this. You know, the idea of now the kingdom is whole and complete, and we've established this timeline of the kingdom, of Princess Zelda. Not only that, but the fact that Ganondorf is sealed in the Sacred Realm, which is underneath the Hyrule Castle that was established in Skyward Sword. All of this actually really makes sense to leading up to Breath of the Wild. So I actually have to go with this timeline, but let's just investigate the other ones and see if they fit a little bit better. So let's go back to the time at the end of Ocarina of Time where Link actually becomes a child again. Well, he convinces Zelda of everything that happened and shows her the Triforce that is on his hand. This convinces Zelda to believe him and give him the Ocarina of Time, thus averting any sort of problems and basically skipping the whole events of Ocarina of Time. And Link ends up riding off into the sunset with Epona until he comes into a really weird world called Termina and enters everyone's favorite game, Mask of Majora, which is a very weird game. And essentially is, I don't know, I like it, but it's not my favorite. You essentially collect different masks, you right the wrongs, you try to get this mask, the Mask of Majora, back from Skull Kid and give it to this really creepy salesman. You have the moon about to crush the entire world, but then you enlist the help of 4 giants to hold up the moon. You then are able to fight Skull Kid, you remove the mask, you find find out the mask is actually the evil thing. You defeat the mask and give it back to this creepy salesman. End of the story. Now on to Twilight Princess, which actually has us rejoining Ganon as he's about to pay for the crimes that he was about to commit in Ocarina of Time. And they have him chained up and thrust a giant sword into his chest. Well, since he does have the Triforce of power, he's able to withstand this, and he escapes into the Twilight Realm, which is a realm that they never talked about before, but essentially it's where the Twilight people live, and it is almost there again, like a doppelganger universe. In the Twilight Realm, Ganondorf meets Zent, who he convinces to invade Hyrule. Now, once the Twilight Princess Midna discovers their plan, she tries to oppose Zent and Gandalf. Midna is then cursed and sent into Hyrule, while Gandalf and Zent turn Hyrule into a nightmarish Twilight world, where everybody is transformed into these really creepy figures. Think of like Slenderman almost. Well, everyone except for Link, who is transformed into a wolf, where he then meets the said Twilight Princess Midna, and she guides him on his way to become the human form of Link again, meet Zelda, gain the Master Sword, travel to the Twilight Universe, restore the Twilight Universe, come back and fight Ganondorf not once, not twice, but 3 times, in epic battles where he is finally defeated. We reunite the Triforce, we actually break the curse of Midna. As she is leaving, she breaks the Mirror of Twilight to forever sever the connection between the two worlds. Now, hundreds of years have passed, and that leads us into the Four Swords Adventures, which actually has the Hyrule people and the Gerudo people, who, that's who Ganondorf is from, is the Gerudo people. Actually has the Hyrules and the Gerudos as actually friends, but somehow Ganondorf is just reborn. They didn't really explain how. There was no cause for it. He was just there. And it's not just him. He also has a mirror that strangely resembles the Twilight Mirror, but it's not it. He uses it, though, to resurrect our old friend Barty, from way back in there, who actually hasn't appeared in this timeline. And those two decide to capture Zelda. They are successful with their plan, and our only option is to find the Four Sword. Once we find it, we right the wrongs of the Light World, and we fix all of the problems. We beat Barty, and then we go off and beat Ganon. Now, there's only one issue with this. Now, this is the end of that timeline, by the way. The timeline where Link actually stays a kid. Now, as I played through these games, I have to tell you, I had a ton of fun, especially Twilight Princess. That game is amazing, but it's amazing on its own. It doesn't really fit into the timeline, neither does Mask of Majora. Neither one of these games really fit into any of the world that is ever established in The Legend of Zelda. The only thing that really does add up, though, is Ganondorf being executed for his crimes, but that is really short-lived, and then immediately is paradox to the Twilight Realm, which is not something ever mentioned. You'd think that would be something the sages or anyone would bring up at some point, and it just ends up being this perfect little area for Ganondorf to run off to. Just, I don't know, odd. It just doesn't feel right, is what I'm saying. Like, you should play the games because they're fun, but they don't really add to the timeline. So I have to go back to the original idea in here, and that is that Link is dead. After playing all of the timelines, it's really the one that fits the best. Now, I'm going to explain the future, Link stays an adult timeline just very briefly, because this is already way longer than I anticipated it to be. But essentially, the things that don't make sense is Wind Waker, for one. The whole world gets swallowed up in water to protect the Triforce. Well, who has control of the water, for one? But even less than that, Link doesn't appear to be an adult. So that already breaks that division right there. Not to mention the other games are incredibly hard to find, and I only had to read about them, but they also just really seem independent from the entire timeline. Again, I've heard good games, but just not really fitting in this timeline. So it's kind of disturbing after playing all of these games and reading about some of the other ones to find out that the Link that we start off with, the Link of Skyward Sword, actually died in Ocarina of Time, which is insane, right? Like, we've all played the game multiple times and we all think it's the same Link, but apparently not. Link actually dies in Ocarina of Time, and the Link from the past Link is the one that we're still playing as in Breath of the Wild. I know that was a ton to go over, and I skipped through a whole world of stuff. I didn't want to ruin any spoilers. For anyone who actually wanted to play those games and experience those adventures, I barely did anything besides predict what you all know would happen in most of these kind of games. Good guy beats bad guy, essentially. But I wanted to give some overarching story as to why I believe that Link is dead. Well, you know what I mean. The Ocarina of Time Link is dead. The Skyward Sword Link is dead. But that the Link to the Past Link is the one that we're using in Breath of the Wild, which is also in itself really cool, because that's kind of the first Link a lot of us were introduced to, and that's kind of the one that we know. But that is where I'm going to leave you, because this video has gone on forever, way longer than I anticipated. It took a lot of work, and you know what? It's going to take a lot of your time. So if you did stay to the end, just put in Link to the Past, and I will put you into a drawing for a $10 eShop card, because I appreciate you sticking with me through this entire time. Anyway, I appreciate each and every one of you guys. Hope you guys have fun playing Tears of the Kingdom. I'm excited to pick it up. Hopefully this video comes out before it launches, but that's actually looking like that might not happen. I appreciate you guys though. Take care. Love you. Bye-bye.